Every single year, a raft of clubs makes exactly the same mistake, and it has huge costs, whether it's very, very small or up to and in excess of £260 million. In this video, I'm going to run through what the mistake is, why the mistake costs so much, and how clubs are getting around it and what they're doing to safeguard themselves in the future. So, first up, why exactly does the mistake matter? And the mistake ultimately leads to relegation for a lot of football clubs. And the costs of relegation can be absolutely colossal at the top tier of English football. In the first year, clubs lose something like £75 million between broadcasting revenue and merchandising and ticketing and all the other associated incomings that football clubs have. Sponsors are another big one because they don't have global viewership anymore. In year two, as parachute payments start going away, this increases to £85 million. In the final year, it can be over £100 million of a difference from if you were in the Premier League to where you are now. In total, that is at least 260 million, and that is a fairly conservative guess. The costs can spiral beyond all of that, and it isn't good. So, what are the mistakes that the clubs are making? And at this point, just pop in the comments what you think the mistake is ahead of time. You can edit the comment afterwards if you change your mind, but I think it's quite interesting to find out what you guys think. Subscribe and like as well while you're down there. And I feel like the massive mistake that a lot of clubs are making is they are doing the Brighton model, but they are doing it wrong. The way that Brighton works is they will sign cheap, affordable talent from around the world, specifically Ecuador, Colombia, Japan, and they will develop them and then start playing them in their first team. However, clubs that watch on have made a raft of mistakes, and I feel like that is why they're falling behind and eventually getting relegated. It happened to Southampton last season, it happened to Leeds last season, and the first step in the issue is copying the heavy youth investment but doing it differently. Say if Brighton spend £20 million on youth footballers, in all likelihood they're spending that on £4-5 million players, whereas a Southampton or a Leeds last season would have spent that all on one youngster. And it's a little bit of a less efficient way of doing things to start off with. It's before we even get into the bulk of what the mistake is. And it's just putting all of your eggs into one basket and potentially throwing money at something that doesn't work. Brendan Aronson is a good example. He's not exactly a wonder kid sort of situation. He's a player that's still got a lot of potential. But we put a lot of money into him when we could have spread it out a little bit more intelligently. In addition, failure to use loans is another issue that these clubs have dealt with, Leeds United being one of the biggest culprits. If you look at Leeds over the past few years, we've not really loaned out many players. Yes, Joe Gelhardt went to Sunderland last summer or winter, I can't quite remember which, but he didn't get that much game time and he didn't kick on very well, and there's an argument that he should have done that a few seasons ago to develop a little bit more. Throughout the Bielsa years, there wasn't much loaning of players, and I feel like we've really missed a trick there. That incredibly promising under-21s generation with McGurk, McKinstry, didn't really come to anything, and that's because we didn't use loans in the slightest. We focused on winning under-23s cups and leagues and stuff like that, and we didn't really develop incredible players out of it, aside from a couple, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. In addition to that, young players are not used to playing in big moments and big impact football matches. If you look at the likes of, I'll bring up Brendan Aronson again, he's not someone that has necessarily played in a lot of relegation six-pointers in the past. Yes, he's played a fair bit for Salzburg and he's won a couple of leagues with them. But in terms of his experience at the bottom of the table when things get incredibly tough and you're fighting for survival rather than glory, that's an entirely different situation. And you've got players that aren't used to those moments. And at the same time, your experienced players might not necessarily be up to scratch. Something that we noticed last year was a lot of the old promotion side players that were sticking around weren't quite up to the Premier League standard anymore. Luke Ayling wasn't keeping up with Heung-min Son because, of course, he wasn't. That is a massive ask. And that's going to happen. But at the same time, you've got your youth players who you can't trust in these situations because we don't know if they've got the mentality for it. And you can't really trust the experienced players because you don't know if they're up to the standard for it. And that leads to poor results. And that means that the pressure mounts even more, which means that you can't play the youth players as much, which means that you're relying more on the experienced players and their mentality starts to crack. And then you get into this dangerous cycle. And I think that's where Leeds and Southampton are on a different end of the spectrum. Leeds had arguably a few too many of the experienced players relying on Cooper and Ayling at the back, and it didn't work out. On the other side of the coin, Southampton got too many youngsters in. Gavin Bazunu proved to be statistically one of the worst goalkeepers in the league, and it was a gamble, but it was one that didn't pay off, and that is the entire issue that I'm talking about here. The mistake is overly gambling on a few big eggs that you think are going to develop into these cracking players, and they just don't in time. Of course, they might going forwards, and I'm going to get into that in a moment. But in terms of keeping you in the Premier League, it doesn't quite work out. And I think Leeds United under Farke are avoiding it quite well by A, the recruitment that's been done so far, and B, his selection in matches. So in terms of recruitment, he signed a lot of experienced players. Carl Darlow coming in probably thought he was a number one, but it turns out he wasn't. He's come in and he's played a sort of very nice mentoring role for Illan Meslier, and he's done a very good job of it. Illan Meslier has had a very good season in, I think we're still the second best defence in the Championship for goals conceded. And I think a lot of that comes from Darlow helping to get his confidence up, and there's a little bit more competition there, which forces all of the players to push their standards higher as well. Sam Byram coming back to Leeds is someone that's played a hell of a lot of football and been around a lot of training rooms. He's not only going to be good on the pitch, he'll be great behind the scenes. And Glenn Kamara brings a little bit of quality while still having played a lot of football, including in the old firm, which, as I mentioned earlier, young players aren't used to the big moments. There are not many bigger moments for a player than being in the old firm and having incredibly angry crowds screaming at you. In addition to that, a lot of the recruitment was youth players with a lot of game time. Ethan Ampadu has played an obscene amount of football for a 23-year-old. He started, I think, when he was 15. And although there's that weird fact of every time he's gone on loan, he's gotten relegated, he still played a lot of football in those seasons, and those are difficult moments to play through, and he still managed to develop into someone good throughout all of that. There's also Joel Pirro. I didn't really want to put him as an experienced player because he's still only 24 or 25, but he has played a lot for his age, and he's performed incredibly for the Championship as well. And in addition, Jaden Anthony, another young player, just 23, with a lot of appearances for Bournemouth. I'm going to have a very, very quick look, actually, at how much football he has played, because it is probably more than I think it is. In his career thus far, if I can find it, I have scrolled too far. Yeah, he's played almost 100 matches at the age of 23 across the Championship and the Premier League, and he's always proven himself to be very, very good at his job. And it's a very good bit of recruitment to get Sinisterra out, who didn't want to be here, and Jaden Anthony in, who both wants to be here and has played a hell of a lot of Championship football before. And in addition to the signing experience and the youth players that already have game time, you're going to have some young players that don't have any game time. And that's where you start to embed the wonder kids. And I think the Ruter, Somerville, and Nonta trio is potentially the best example of this. You've got players that are consistently in the same squad. They are growing with the players that play around them, building up these little passing systems and networks that work out really, really well. And because they've got the experience of using that consistently, they're able to handle the bigger moments a little bit better because they know what they're going to do. It becomes routine. It becomes almost like a machine. Like on a production line building cars, a robot isn't going to shut down just because it gets a little bit hot. And it's the same weird metaphor that sort of applies to these players. They are parts of a bigger machine in a football team, and if you can get it running efficiently, it should do so in the scarier moments as well. The same applies for Archie Gray. He's been playing a hell of a lot of football, and not potentially the best thing for him a lot of the time, but it means that he's getting used to that system. He's getting used to both central midfield and right back, and you'll notice that when the system changed because he went to right back, he struggled a little bit. And I think that's because he's gotten used to that initial system, which is showing the whole parts know where they fit in a machine thing. Give Archie Gray more time at right back, he'll fit in there perfectly. And ultimately what we're doing is we're building a squad that is capable of Premier League football while still having those young players. And we can continue doing this buying youngsters model going forwards, as long as it's balanced against experience, young players that have played a lot of football, and calm heads in the dressing room. Ultimately, that gives you a more cohesive unit and means that you are not going to fall into the £260 million mistake that clubs need to avoid. Hope you enjoyed. Like, subscribe, and comment down below what you think of the video, and I will see you later.